we're going to continue in our series called I Pledge Allegiance. I Pledge Allegiance, and you can see the tagline there, how to navigate a political season as a follower of Jesus. I'll explain a little bit more about this if you're just jumping in with us. I want to read a couple verses though first. Out of 1 Corinthians chapter 9, just to kind of set up a little bit of where we're going today. This is Paul, and I'll kind of explain more about why Paul wrote this in a minute. But this is Paul writing to a church in Corinth. He said, hey, even though I am a free man with no master, right? No one tells me what to do. I have become a slave to all people to bring many to Christ. Do we have these verses up here, Caden, real quick? Sorry. Even though, I may not have put those in the computer. Chapter 9? Yeah, he's saying no, I didn't. That was my bad. He said, when I was with the Jews, I lived like the Jews to bring them to Christ. I didn't have to follow the Jewish law, but I did. And then he continues on in verse 21. He says, hey, look, and then when I was with the Gentiles, the non-Jewish people, I would live a little bit like them. And he ended it with this idea, I lived apart from the law so that I can bring many to Christ. And Paul is, maybe you're kind of familiar with these verses before, but he set up this idea like, listen, when I was with the Jewish people, I would kind of honor their traditions. And when I was with the non-Jewish people, I would kind of honor some of their traditions. I would do whatever it would take because I wanted to win some to Christ. He's talking about this idea of freedoms. Freedoms like, listen, I'm free to do whatever I want, he said. I can live however I want. Christ has set me free. I'm not bound to any person's opinions or preferences. I don't got to do what you say, but I will live as a servant to you so that you can see Jesus through the way that I love you. Like, I'm not compelled to have to do what you want me to do, but I'll do it anyways. And Paul is setting up this idea of what we're talking about today, this idea of freedoms versus convictions. That's what we're going to be talking about today. Freedoms versus convictions. What are we allowed to do versus what we have to do versus what we want to do? And that's where we're going. I want to set up the series. If you're like just jumping in with us, if you missed the last 2 weeks, this series, we've been answering this question right here. How can we follow Jesus and represent him well in a politically divided and hostile time? Okay? And you open your eyes and you see that this is the world we live in. It is so politically divided. It is so politically hostile. And as followers of Jesus, you and I, we got to figure out, well, how do we follow him well? Because it's a crazy time out there. And specifically, we said this in week 1 as kind of the intro statement, and I want to make sure we hear this again, is that as followers of Jesus, our first allegiance is supposed to be to Jesus and his throne. Now, we are dual citizens, right? We have 2 citizenships. We're Americans, right? If you're an American in the room. But we are also citizens of the kingdom of heaven. And so we balance that, and that's kind of like tension. It's like, well, which one do I follow today? How do I do both and do them both well? How do I care about my country that I love so much, but also follow Jesus? And it has to be here that Jesus is our first king. Jesus is where our first pledge goes to. That's how it has to happen. Now, it doesn't always happen that way. Sometimes we get sidetracked. We'll forget about these 2 kingdoms. We'll get really, really obsessed and interested with politics, which we can get interested with. But the problem is we talk about a lot of people will idolize politics, right? We go from being caring and concerning to just being obsessed. And now all of my hope, all of my faith, and even my fear is in politics. And so we have to balance that tension. And that's really what this whole series is about. It's like, man, how do we live within this world? Because we got to figure this out. We got to follow Jesus well. And last week we talked about anger, because sometimes politics cause a little bit of anger within us because there's some disagreements. And so if you're find yourself angry in this season and you missed last week, I would go back and watch last week. That might be helpful, some helpful tools for you. What do I do with my anger that is within me? Because we all have anger over something, especially when it comes to politics. And so this week we're going to continue talking about this idea of division and having disagreements, but not on the anger side, just more of how do we function within all of this. We'll be in 1 Corinthians 8 primarily. If you want to click there or turn there, we'll get there in just a minute. The notes should be on the YouVersion app as well, if you're not familiar with that. But we'll be in 1 Corinthians 8. So I want to play a game, and this is good because I feel like you guys are asleep this morning because nobody responded when I said good morning. So how are we feeling? We good? Okay. We're going to play a little game. I need a little bit of crowd participation. So we're just going to do this or that. I just need you to raise your hand or something, okay? So I'm going to name 2 things. And then we'll go back and I'll say 1, you raise your hand if you prefer that or like that, okay? So real obvious, real classic, Coke or Pepsi, okay? So if you're a fan of Coke, raise your hand. If you prefer Coke, there we go. And if you prefer Pepsi, go ahead and there's the door. Just kidding. It's like, what's the point? It's not as good, right? We have opinions on things in life, right? And we do that with things like Coke or Pepsi. Okay, so another easy one, Apple or Android. So all the Apple people raise their hand. Yeah, all right. And all the green bubble people raise their hand. Yeah. We had a group text for our students at camp. And we're like, listen, if you have an Android, you're just not getting the group text. We'll text you individually. Sorry, we're just not doing it. But we divide over things like that. All right, Ford or Chevy? Ford? Okay, Chevy? Okay, a little more split there. I don't know. I drive a Honda minivan, so you tell me. I don't know. Ice cream, right? So, okay, so vanilla ice cream? Okay, chocolate ice cream. Yeah, see, I feel like chocolate's probably the one we go to more often than not. So all right, beach and the lake. Who prefers the beach? Okay. I think I would be in the beach crowd. Who prefers the lake? I love the lake too, though, so it's hard. That's a hard one to argue with, right? What about coffee? Who drinks coffee as it should? Black. Okay. And who likes what I like to call frou-frou coffee, where you add the stuff to it? Yeah. And some of y'all are like, no coffee. Where's my energy drink people? Yeah, Celsius, I know that's the thing right now. If Nicole and Richard were here, they would definitely be raising their hand right now as well. Celsius might be your thing. Okay, last one. All right, Republican or Democrat? I'm just kidding. Just kidding. Because what's funny is if we were to do that on that subject, it's fun to laugh and joke about Android and green bubbles, right? But then we do some things, and some things aren't funny. Some things are, whoa, they're divisive. Right? And we felt that even in that moment. We all laughed, but it's like if we were to raise hands, some people are like, are you kidding me? You vote what? Like, and we'll start having conversations about other things, and very quickly opinions shift from laughing and talking and joking about differences to how dare you, right? And politics is one of those. Now, there's a lot of things in life. There's a lot of things even like that in the big picture church, denomination to denomination, different theological opinions or takes on certain things. There are difference of opinions that people will have. And what happened is we talked about last week, the extreme examples of opinions, which is we go to anger, right? Well, this week we're going to take a step back to that. But what happens is when we have different opinions, we can go to division. And it's like, well, automatically you're on that side of the fence and I'm on this side of the fence. Now again, Coke and Pepsi we might laugh about, but other things like politics or something else in life, it causes this division. It's like, well, I can't be aligned with you because how could you possibly think that way, talk that way, vote that way, believe that way, right? And having difference of opinions causes division very quickly, very easily. And what happens from there, because we are now divided, because you've chosen that side and I've chosen this side, and even though people who have different political opinions, for example, we have so many similarities, so much in common. Yet we let that line of thinking continue of division, and what happens is eventually we become disrespectful. And when we have different opinions, we divide, and then we become disrespectful people. And now I can't even honor you. I can't even look at you as a fellow brother or even a fellow believer because you voted that way. How dare you? How could you? You're what's wrong with this country. And we begin to say things. We talked about this a lot last week. We begin to post things. We begin to talk about people, or even just the way we think about people, the way we judge people internally. And a lot of times it's loud, but a lot of times it's quiet. It's just that internal disrespect towards people. And as a follower of Jesus, we got to be mindful of what goes on the inside, because the heart reveals a lot about us. Even if we think it and no one else knows it, we know it, and we know that, man, that is nothing but disrespect towards that person or towards that group. And listen, here's the deal. The reason that division and disrespect happens, because when you have these political opinions, or just really any things, what it is it's gray issues that we turn into black and white issues. It's issues that are supposed to be complex and full of conversation, but we make them into right and wrong. Now, listen, there are some right and wrong things, especially you look at the Bible, 10 Commandments, like murder, right and wrong, okay? We understand, hey, you shouldn't do that. That's never okay? Lying, unless you're lying to your kids, right? Not okay? Like, we get that. Stealing is not okay. Violence is not okay. Like, we know there are some things that are black and white in Scripture. There are some things that are clearly wrong. God says, do not do that thing. But there are a lot of things that are great issues. There are a lot of things in life, when you look at the Bible, you look at Scripture, you look at the scope of it, you're like, I don't know. That's up for conversation, because you could look at it one way and I could look at it another way, and it's like, well, I see what you're saying. Like, for example, alcohol. Now, some of you in the room are like, yeah, that is a great issue. And some of you are like, no, it's not. Like, I would say there's a lot of Christians, and I know a lot of people who love Jesus who do not drink, and I know a lot of people who love Jesus who drink. Now, I think the Bible is very clear, don't get drunk. We can have that conversation. There is no line on that one. All right, and that's not making you feel bad if you had a little too much this week. I'm saying that is very clear in Scripture. But the conversation around alcohol is interesting, because you could look at Scripture and make arguments both ways. And some of you even now are like, oh, how is that even a gray issue? It is a gray issue. I think tattoos, another gray issue, right? Some people, not a fan of tattoos, right? We would raise hands on that one. That might be a little uncomfortable as well, okay? We won't raise hands on those things. Those are maybe some gray issues that you can kind of look at throughout Scripture. Things like, should women only wear dresses to church? Because for a long time, that was a very normal thing. Women had to wear dresses. It's like, why? Well, there's this one part that people kind of took things and ran with it, and like they staked their lives on the fact that women were not allowed to wear pants. They had to wear dresses inside of church, right? And we kind of laugh at that now today, but at a certain point in times, like that was a black and white issue. Like there's lots of this. Can you listen to secular music? I don't know. You go find your take on that. The point that I'm trying to make is that a lot of people will take these theological and these biblical things, and we'll take our spin and we'll take our opinion and we'll listen to what somebody else says, and then we'll find like a blog post that we like or a social media person that we like that helps me think my way. And what we'll do is we will turn these convictions into these right and wrong things. And here, we're going to talk a lot about convictions today. I want to say this. A conviction is just a firmly held belief or opinion. It's just a firmly held belief or opinion. You have a conviction that this is right and this is wrong. Apple, Android, Ford, Chevy, whatever it is, Republican, Democrat. That's your conviction, but it's your conviction. It is a personal opinion, right? It is a personal belief because it's a gray issue. And like I have the personal opinion that college football is the greatest sport, right? Okay? Some of you guys may not have that opinion, right? But there's nothing like waking up on Saturday watching game day, okay? I love it. Now, some of y'all would disagree, and you'd be wrong, and that's okay. It's my conviction. But that's all a conviction is. It's my held belief. It is my opinion. But here's the issue. Here's the issue with the gray areas of personal convictions is that too many people will turn personal convictions into indisputable facts. And we will stake our lives on what I think. Again, politically speaking, we know this, and maybe you've done this before, maybe you're in that right now, maybe you know somebody who's that way. It's like they have staked their life on this political opinion about the party or a belief about this thing, this stance, whatever else. Maybe it's nothing to do with political stuff. It's just about like how you live and function in your life, maybe in your marriage or in your parenting or whatever else, how you spend your money. It's like, no, this conviction isn't just a conviction. This is right or that is wrong. That's what too many people do. And this is what people do no matter of your belief in Jesus. And so if you're in the room, you're like, I don't even know where I'm at with Jesus. Maybe I'm struggling in my faith. This is a fact for everybody, especially we see politically in the world, right? Everybody has this issue. We all see this problem. How could you like Android, right? How do you put milk in your coffee? How dare you, right? That is an indisputable fact that it is better this way. You drink alcohol? How dare you? You don't drink? Oh, you're stuck up. Oh, you're a sinner. Like we do these things, right? You voted for that? No, you're part of the problem. You're part of the issue. And we turn our opinions into indisputable facts. But here's the truth that we need to hold and cling to today, that it is possible. Here's what I'm going to tell you. It is possible to hold to your convictions yet not live divided. There is a way for us to wrestle with the tension of like, we don't agree. This is my conviction. I do have this conviction, but I don't have to live divided with you, and I don't have to disrespect you because of it. And we can hold to our difference of opinions on these great issues, especially politically speaking, because guess what? The Bible kind of references a little bit of some of these great things, but it doesn't say vote or blue. It doesn't say vote for Donald or Kamala or whoever else. It doesn't tell us that. So how can we not live divided, and how can we love people and not disrespect people, but yet still hold to our convictions? There's a way we can do it. And Paul wrote about this, how we can do this well, because thankfully we are not the first group of believers in a church, in a setting to where like they've messed this up and they've made gray issues into black and white, undisputed. This is it. We're not the first one. So it's kind of some good news. So it's a little bit of encouragement this morning for us today here in America in 2024. Paul wrote this letter in 1 Corinthians because of this very thing, not politically, but because of gray issues, okay? So Paul, he wrote this letter to a church in Corinth. That's the name of the city. And Paul showed up to Corinth. He was a missionary. It is a very diverse city, very big city. You had a lot of non-Jewish people. They're called Gentiles, right? They're the people who did not come from a Jewish background. Then you have Jewish people. And so you're already starting off with these very two culturally different backgrounds. It's like, you take Yankees and rednecks and you blend them together. It's like, that's just not going to mesh well. There's a lot of difference of opinions, right? Okay? And you get them together. It's like, how do we function and live together? And that's kind of this melting pot of what's happened here. And what happens because of cultural differences and backgrounds, they lived different way. They believed certain things. They participated differently. And so one of those big things was about food. All right, now this might be a little weird, but just stick with me, okay? It was about food that was sacrificed to idols, okay? It was about meat, animal meat that was sacrificed to idols, which again, for you and I, that's weird today, but you got to think Greek culture back then. This was very normal. It was a part of everyday life. Everybody did it. They had their idols, they had their false gods, and all the Greek people, they would make sacrifices to it. Now, with some of the sacrifices, they wouldn't use all the meat. And so here was the issue, is the leftover meat. Well, what do you do with that? Well, some of the old school, traditional, conservative people are like, man, you can't touch that. That meat is tainted. They sacrificed that to their god, a false god. How can you go and take part of that meat? But some of the other people are like, man, that meat they're selling, a lot of times it was on sale. It was at a discount rate. And I don't know about you, but everybody loves a good deal, right? Even the early church back then, everybody loved a good deal, okay? Everybody gets some Prime Day deals, okay? Everybody loves a good deal, okay? And that was the same thing back then. And so some other people were like, look, this is on sale. I don't really care about their false god. I need some food for my kids. Got tight, budget's tight, inflation, right? And so they're like, hey, let's get this at a discounted price, and we'll take it home and we'll eat it. And that is the situation. Paul is now writing this letter to address this issue of food, whether you should eat it or not. But I think there's something greater. It's a bigger zoomed out picture that you and I can learn today, even though we don't have to deal with food to false gods. The reality is, though, this opinion thing was becoming a black and white issue for some people. And how do we, I don't have this conviction. You have that conviction. I feel like I have freedom. You don't feel like you. So what do we do, and how do we wrestle with that? Can we go and get along through this? And here's what Paul is saying in 1 Corinthians, starting in chapter 8, verse 1. He says, now regarding your question about food, so here you see it right here, food that has been offered to idols, okay? This is what you guys are asking about. And so the whole letter is about division. He talks about division with sex, division now with food for a few chapters. He's talking about how do you gather together in a body and worship together. And now he's like, hey, all right, let's talk about the food. Yes, we know that we all have knowledge about this issue. Now, this is really big. That might sound a little weird or confusing. But what he's saying is that some of us have the right knowledge. We already know the right answer, because Paul's going to lay out what the answer is. And some of us, what he's saying is, some of us already get the issue that the food is not a big deal. Like, if we're going to be honest. Yeah, they sacrificed it to their God, but let's be real. We know that those gods aren't real. We don't have to tell them that, but those are false gods. Those are false idols. And you can take this lamb and you can pretend it's going up to the moon god, but the moon god's not real, and that lamb doesn't have a soul, and we're going to cook it up and barbecue it. It's going to taste the same either way. And that's kind of what he's saying. Like, some of us have knowledge. Like, we get what the real answer already is. Like, we understand that what they're doing doesn't actually change the food on the table. It doesn't change the food on the table. But before we go any further with this whole, he's in about 3 chapters, 8, 9, and 10. He's laying all this out. He said, right here in verse 1, this is the first half. Let's go to the second half of verse 1. He says, but while knowledge, even though we know the right thing, it makes us feel important. What's he say? It's love that strengthens the church. So, hey, before we get into this issue about who's right or wrong, let's back up a second and zoom out. The more important, the greater thing here is to see that it's love that strengthens the church. It's love that strengthens the people within the church. It's love that unifies us. It's not knowledge that does that. It's love that does that, right? And it's, again, you can have the right answer. I kind of joked about this a little bit last week. If you've been in a conversation, if it's somebody at work, if it's with your spouse, if it's with a friend, whoever, it's like you said the right thing, but you said it the wrong way, right? And maybe you've done it. Maybe you've been guilty. I know I have. It's like, man, that was the right answer, but that was not helpful because you were very rude in your right answer. You know what I mean? Like, come on, is that just me? Like, we've all been there before. And that's what Paul's saying. He said, look, you know the right answer, but how we live with the right answer matters more. How we function within the right answer is more important because, and here's a way to think about it. It says the right answer isn't always the best answer. That's what I would say. The right answer isn't always the best answer. Because if it's carried out the wrong way, it's going to do more harm than good. If we're beating over people's heads, if we're not doing it out of love, the right answer is not always the best answer. If we can go back real quick to that verse for me, Caden. He says, the translation says, can we go back to that? There we go. Oh, sorry, the next one. My bad. We all have knowledge. There it is. It makes us feel important. This is the NLT translation. Knowledge makes us feel important. The NIV or the CSB, ESV, some of those other more common translations, they say knowledge, it puffs us up. And what he's talking about is it gives us this, I have the right answer, this false sense of arrogance and insecurity. It's like, I know all the right things, right? And like we all know people who walk around with that sense of like puffed up, like, yeah, I'm the man, I got this, I have this figured out. And it's like, that's cool, man. You can know the right answer, but we all see that within you, and we see this like overlaying just arrogance and this just pride, and that's not fun to be around. And what he's saying is, look, it's love that strengthens arrogance and pride and being puffed up and making us feel important because we know the right thing. That doesn't strengthen the church. What strengthens the church is love. And I would say if it's love that strengthens the church and it's not knowledge, that pride, that arrogance will actually weaken the church. That knowledge in the wrong way will actually weaken the body. And how does the body weaken? We're spread apart. We're divided. Paul's saying, look, you guys are letting this like minor issue divide the church, divide the body, divide the believers when we're supposed to be strengthened together in unity and oneness. That was what we talked a lot about last week. And so, listen, if standing on our truth or opinion, if that's what we're doing, our knowledge, if that's what we do, we will weaken our relationship with each other. But if we stand on love, we will be stronger together, is what Paul is driving home. So yeah, we have freedom, but loving each other is more important than standing on the principle of freedom. Okay, that's what he's trying to get to. And he continues, you jump down to verse 9 of here of chapter 8. He says, but you must be careful so that your freedom doesn't cause others with a weaker conscience to stumble. Okay, so freedom is awesome. You've got freedom to, again, in their context, eat whatever food you want to, right? It's like you kind of do it. You don't have to. You do have to. You can, whatever. But make sure that it doesn't cause others with a weaker conscience to stumble. Because, listen, God gives us freedom to think and act as we like, but not without the responsibility of how it views other people or how it affects other people. You can do as you wish to an extent with great things. Black and white things are clear. But just because it is gray doesn't mean there's no responsibility with how we function. And this is what he says in verse 10. For if others see you with your superior knowledge, eating in the temple of an idol, won't they be encouraged to violate their own conscience by eating food that hasn't been offered to an idol? So again, this knowledge is like, it doesn't really matter. Food's food, okay? The food doesn't have a soul. The food tastes the same. The point of the food is to nourish your body, not to become an idol itself. We get that. We have knowledge of that. But if what you're doing is causing other people to be weakened in their faith or to step against their own convictions, it's not worth it. If standing on your conviction or standing on your freedom is a bigger deal to you than honoring somebody else's convictions, we kind of miss the point. We've kind of missed the point with your opinion on this gray issue. I had the idea of like, we've got a dog, and our dog lives inside our house. And when we went to visit your family, my wife's family last year, we took the dog with us, and with her parents, the dog stayed in the house. But when we would go visit some of her family members, we would bring the dog with us because he was a puppy too at the time, and we'd bring him in the house. And it was like, oh, no, dogs don't come in this house. We're like, oh, okay, my bad. Let's take you back out, and we'll let you run outside for a little while. And now, in that moment, it's like we could have stood on the principle. It's like, no, this is an inside dog. He's allowed. Dogs can be in houses. He's in our house. He's in her parents' house. Why can't he come in your house? But I would how rude and how standing on the knowledge that it's okay for dogs to be in house, that would have been rude and divisive and disrespectful. But rather, we submit that freedom of choice to say, my dog can live in my house, but it doesn't have to come inside your house. Does that make sense? It's the idea of you can do that, but you don't have to do it in a disrespectful way to other people. There is a better way of doing it. Here's what I would say that Paul is trying to say here, that a justified choice of freedom, it can be wrong if it's not done in the right way. Whatever your belief is, let's just say politically for this example, it may be justified. You have your convictions. You vote your way and think your way. That's fine. But if we stand on those convictions in the wrong way, right, it becomes a wrong thing because now I'm viewing and I'm judging and I'm self-righteous and now I'm thinking less of you and I'm divided with you and now I've weakened the body and I see people as my enemy rather than my brother. And that's never what Jesus would have us do. You see, a justified choice of freedom, it can be wrong if it's not done in the right way. That's what he's trying to get us to see, is that political differences or theological differences or just life choice differences. People wear shoes in the house. Some people leave them at the door. We're those people, okay? It's should we fight over that and divide over a relationship because you wore your shoes in the house when we don't do that? No. And we love people through a difference. Because remember, what we started this series about is we're not just citizens of America. We're citizens of two kingdoms. You are citizens of God's heavenly kingdom as well. And as dual citizens, we wrestle with that. It's like, well, how can I honor you and love you and hold my conviction? And Paul says this is how we do it. This is how we do it right here. He continues on. And verse 12, he really brings a seriousness to it. He says, and when you sin against other believers by encouraging them to do something they believe is wrong, you are sinning against Christ. Now, two things in this. Okay, one, if you encourage somebody to do something against their conviction, even though you think it's okay to do, you're causing that person to sin because it's against their conviction. At the same time, how does he end that? You're also sinning against Jesus. You are hurting Jesus' heart when you lead someone who has a conviction down a path that they don't want to go down. When we are negatively influencing someone because of my freedom and I can live this and I can do what I want. I'm going to vote that way or I'm going to think this and I'm going to act that way. It's like, hey, look, that's not helpful when you're leading someone down a path that they don't want to go down. When you're influencing a path towards something for someone that's something negative in their life. He's saying this idea that your freedoms and your convictions are not more important than somebody else's. Look at how he says in verse 13. So if what I eat causes another believer to sin, this is a bold statement because I wouldn't make this statement. I will never eat meat again as long as I live, right? I want a steak for dinner, okay? But here's what Paul's saying. Look, I'll never eat again because I don't want to cause another believer to stumble. What's Paul saying? He's zooming out saying, look, this minor issue of food is not as important as our issue of relationship. This political difference is not as important as our relationship. This theological difference is not as important as our relationship. And I will sacrifice that difference so that I can see eye to eye and get along with my brother and sister, even though we view differently this thing over here. I will never eat meat again. That's what he's saying. And here's the point, is that your freedoms aren't more important than someone else's convictions. What you choose to do or how you choose to live on these gray areas, which side of the aisle you vote for is not more important than what somebody else chooses to be convicted to live by. And it might be different than you and I. They might vote for the other candidate. They might live a little differently in that gray area, but Paul said, look, that doesn't matter. He said, I'll never eat this food again because that relationship matters more to me. And that's how, just as a side note, if we're not willing to set aside a personal freedom, personal choice of freedom for somebody else's convictions, that might be a sign that that freedom is actually an idol. Let me say that again. If I'm not willing, I have a freedom to do this, to live this, to think this. And if I'm not willing to set that aside for a minute to honor somebody else's convictions, that freedom towards that thing might actually just be an idol in my life. Something I'm obsessed with. Something that I've made king. I've pledged allegiance to that thing in my life. And it may be politics. It might be something else. Entertainment. It might be alcohol. It might be anything. Anything can easily become an idol. It's like, I don't want to let go of that. Well, there's a sign maybe you should for a little while. Why don't you take a fast from it for a week and see how you feel? It might breathe some life into your soul because you don't even realize you're addicted and obsessed with that thing. And Paul is saying, look, caring about other people is more important than caring about your freedom. It's more important than caring about your conviction of what you think is okay or right or wrong or whatever else. Because, as we learned in verse 1, that's what all this is about. You can have knowledge. It's going to puff you up, but what matters more? What strengthens the church? Love. It's not about having your opinion and your preference. It's about loving each other. And how do we love each other? We submit to them. We honor them. We respect them with kindness. I mean, he said this in Romans. Look at these verses in Romans chapter 14. He says, for instance, one person believes it's all right to eat anything, but another believer with a sensitive conscience will eat only vegetables. He continues to the next verse. He says, but those who feel free to eat anything, okay, this is both sides, whether you have a conviction or not. If you feel free to eat anything, you can't look down on those who don't have that freedom. And those who don't eat certain foods must not condemn those who do, for God has accepted them. This is a gray area. Eat the food or not. This is a gray area. Vote the way you want to. This is a gray area. You can live that way or not. But don't condemn them because they choose to. Don't look down upon them because they choose not to. Whichever side of the thing of the aisle they're voting, whichever side of life of that gray area they choose. Now again, we're talking about gray areas, not black and white areas. Man, if God will accept them because of their conviction of what His Holy Spirit is speaking to them, then you and I have to learn how to accept them too. Gray areas, this is what Paul is talking about. Whichever side of the issue you fall on, the follower of Jesus is a life of love, of kindness, compassion, respect, no matter if they choose to eat the food from the idols or not, no matter which sports team they're a fan of, no matter what kind of truck they drive, okay, no matter if they vote Republican or if they vote Democrat. That's the life of a follower of Jesus. But some people, they will stake their lives on these opinions. How dare you? How dare you? Well, I don't know. This is what I feel convicted by. This is the freedom that I feel makes most sense for me. I read the Bible. This is what kind of take away from it. But some people will stake their lives, like we said earlier, they'll make gray issues into black and white. This is what I think, and you are wrong if you don't think that way. But people, here's what I would say when we find ourselves there. People should see the love of Jesus in us more than they should know about our personal convictions. Really, I probably could have put political convictions there too, because it's a political conversation. But I wonder when people look at us, they see us, they listen to us, they see what we follow on social media, what we post on social media. Do they know more about the love of Jesus that's in us, or just more about our stances on our political preferences and our political candidates, or our personal convictions on things? I have my freedom to do this or that. It's like, no, that's not as important as seeing the love of Jesus in us. That's what people should see louder within us. And here's a way to think about it. That what people know most about us shows who our allegiance is ultimately pledged to. What you know most about us, it will show who I am ultimately pledged to. Am I pledged to my freedom and my convictions and my opinions? Am I pledged to my country? Am I pledged to Jesus? Who's king of my life? Is it me? Is it my comfort, my opinion, my freedom, my preference? Is it what Jesus would have? His cross that I'm called to pick up daily? Or is it a donkey or an elephant? Who am I pledged to, ultimately? And when people look at us, they'll see that and they'll know that. Listen, the goal isn't to stand so firm on our convictions and our freedoms. I get to do what I want, that we break relationship, that we get we see disunity in the church, but rather that we would stand so strongly on love that we would see unity in the church, and we'd see unity even in our country beyond just the walls, that we would love people. And here's how I love this summary as we get ready to close out today. Paul in chapter 10, again, chapters 8, 9, and 10 are all about this same idea of food, okay? This gray area issue that people are just missing the point. And this is kind of a great summary. Here's what Paul says, and maybe you've heard these verses before. So whether you eat or drink, or whatever you do, honestly, so you vote this way, you vote that way, you live whatever you do it all for the glory of God. Don't give offense to Jews or Gentiles or the church of God. And this is what he says, I try to please everyone in everything I do. I don't just do what's best for me. And here's the deal. I do what's best for others so that many may be saved. This is a man, Paul, who understood what it meant to be a dual citizen. He was in this weird, complex thing of like, man, I follow Jesus. I'm Jewish, but I'm Roman. But also I'm here in this weird culture of just blended people, and I've got to figure out how to get along. But what matters the most to him is that many may be saved, because he understood there is an eternal heavenly kingdom that is at stake. And then there are people who don't know Jesus that will spend eternity separated from God. And that matters more than a political preference or a political opinion. Someone's salvation and spending eternity in the heavenly kingdom matters more than who becomes the next president. It does. It doesn't mean that you can't be interested in politics and you can't be involved in politics, but it's saying politics are here, God's kingdom here. Really there, like probably should be a bigger difference. That's everything that I do is so that people will come to the heavenly kingdom. They will enter heaven's gates with me one day. So what he says is everything that I do, people should see Jesus. So in this instance, the way I eat, the way I drink. So going back to that gray issue, I don't know. Do people see Jesus in the way you eat and drink? In your hobbies, the things you do for fun. Do people see Jesus? Now, I'm not saying like your fun has to be like knocking door to door, tell people Jesus. That's what I'm saying. Go to the lake, have a good time. But I'm saying the way that you go to the lake and have a good time, do people see Jesus? In your career, it doesn't mean everybody's going to be in ministry, but how you function, the character you have, the way you treat people, the way you talk to people, the way you deal with clients. Do people see Jesus? In our marriage, in our parenting, do our kids see Jesus? Do our spouses see Jesus in the way that we are showing love and kindness? And I would say in how we view and how we engage in politics, do people see Jesus? It doesn't mean you won't have a conviction, but do they see your politics or do they see Jesus and then your politics? That's what Paul was trying to get us to realize here. And ultimately, we'll go ahead and invite the band to come on up. The bottom line statements for today is that our greatest conviction that we should have as a people, our greatest conviction should be for everyone to be a part of God's eternal kingdom. That right there is the number one conviction. Not about your conviction about gray areas, not about your conviction about social issues, not about your conviction about a political party. Those are fine, but the greatest number one conviction should be that everyone that you and I know, we would desire, man, you're not a part of God's, you don't know Jesus, do you? Some people, it's obvious. It's like, man, when's the last time we cared more about this than we cared about the upcoming election? When's the last time we cared more about a friend at work or a family member or a neighbor who doesn't go to church, who doesn't know Jesus, who is looking for fulfillment in everything but Jesus? When's the last time we cared more about their soul than we did about anything else? Maybe you don't care about politics. Maybe that's not it for you. Maybe it's just about your freedoms and your life and your comfort and your pleasures. But that's got to be us. Just like as Paul said, look, I do everything that I do. It's so that many will be saved. I don't want to offend people. I want to show people that Jesus has something better for them. And as soon as I make this stance and like, boom, I'm going to divide people. And now people aren't going to listen or going to talk because I put my foot in my mouth, right? Because I made some political stance saying, people need to see Jesus, as Paul said. Everything we say that we do, how we do everything that we do. That should be our greatest conviction, especially in a politically divided, a politically hostile time. We talked about this last week where it's like, man, the world expects division. We've got to lead the way in this idea of unity and love and kindness as the church. We've got to be the example. We've got to be the ones that say, man, there's a better way to function and have disagreements together. And the way to do it is by loving people so deeply that I care more about their eternal soul than I care about an election or a preference of my own. Would you guys stand as we get ready to close out and sing today? God, we get so caught up in our junk. If we're going to be honest, that's all life's struggles are is I want this or that looks good or that's got my interest, so I'm going to engage in that thing. Lord, our opinions and our preferences, they just get in the way. And whether that's politically or just anything else, God, it just becomes distractions and it becomes division. And God, you want us to be strengthened as a people. You want the church to look across the political aisle and see a brother and a sister that they love deeply, that they would die for, that they would pray for, they would give money to, that they would serve. That's what you want, our hearts to be broken for the people who are going through things. That we would live in such a way that our convictions matter nothing compared to eternal salvation, eternity with you. God, I pray that you would begin to work on our hearts, that we would be people who would make stances on you, Jesus, not stances on politics or preferences. That we would live convicted greater by what you did for us on the cross, Jesus, not by what we hope a politician's going to do in an office. Great are you, Lord, as we're about to sing. You're the one that died on the cross. You're the only one that offers true hope for a better future. No party, no person can do that. So God, today as we just think about all this, God, we sing this out in this reminder that you are great. You are worthy to be praised. It is you who created all things. God, we're here to worship you and no one and nothing else. As we get ready to sing, as always, you're invited to respond during this time. If you want to come down and pray, if you want to come down and take communion as a reminder for what Jesus did on the cross for you, as a reminder of what he wants to do as you look forward in your life, that he's not done working on you. If you want to write down a prayer request, we've got all this on this table over here. But may we sing, but we pray and we talk with God. And God, you're great. Help my convictions to be found in you, not in me or people or anything else. But let's sing this out. Let's declare out who God is.